Good morning. So Graham's explained we're in this, just kicking off this series called The Big Objections. And this morning we're going to be looking at the question, how could any thinking person choose God over science? And that is my way of summarizing the gist of a whole bunch of questions that we received, most of which were about evolution, some of them weren't. So I'm going to read a few examples of the questions we had or objections we had, and then kind of show how I'm trying to tie them together with that sort of formula. How could any thinking person choose God over science? So a number of the questions were about evolution. We had questions like this one. My objection is how misinformed and uninformed Christians in England, generally over the age of 30, are about topics such as evolution and the Big Bang. Being asked by my university-educated medical professional stepmother, who's about 45, if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys, in all seriousness, is unbelievably depressing. So obviously, a lot of people who share that view. There's a lot of laughter there. Good. Okay, so the next one is briefer. The next one simply said, Creationism versus evolution, which is pretty much what the previous person said, just shorter. The next one said, the theory of evolution is really quite compelling, and I struggle to accept that there's another likely scenario where the world and all its glory is created by another means. You can't argue with the presence of fossils and scientific evidence to suggest that we've evolved over millions of years. And then a final statement of this view, I don't think these are the only ones, but this is one more. Why is all the evidence in Darwin's theory of evolution ignored by creationists? So that's a sample of a number of questions which are really about evolution and creation and the fact that you can't hold both, is the claim. Then there were one or two others which were more down a sort of Christianity's unscientific because you can't do repeatable experiments to prove Christian belief, which is true. You can't do an experiment in a laboratory to prove that Jesus is risen from the dead. And that's the centerpiece of Christian belief. That's not how that claim works. There's no lab anywhere in the world that would run you that experiment. So this is one person's objection phrased that way. Christianity is unscientific. Things shouldn't be believed because of 2,000-year-old anonymous second-hand eyewitness testimony, or personal revelations, or dreams, or because an old book said so. Things should be believed because there is repeatable, independently verifiable evidence. Now that view there is, I guess, the view you might call, depending on your background, you might call scientism or you might call logical positivism. And the idea there is, look, if you cannot prove something in a laboratory, then it shouldn't be believed. No matter how many witnesses you might have, that's not how you should decide what to believe. You decide what to believe by science and science only. Now, because we're not going to spend too much time on this, I want to kind of address that very briefly at the start, because that's quite a common view. The problem with that view is, if you accepted it, you would have no arts, no humanities, no literature wouldn't qualify as knowledge anyway, no philosophy, no history, and nothing that happened in the past could be affirmed by anybody, because you can't do an experiment in a lab to prove it's true. So you can't do an experiment in a laboratory to prove that Winston Churchill lived. So we should disregard Winston Churchill and disregard Julius Caesar and William Shakespeare and everybody else. And the problem with that statement, actually, if you were to look at it carefully, the statement saying you should only believe things that can be proved by science, and yet the statement itself can't be proved by science. So on its own terms, we shouldn't believe it. And that's actually a challenge for that. If all human knowledge must be scientifically verifiable, then you're not just saying Christianity can't be true, you're saying no statement about anything that's happened in human history can be true. The only things we can believe are the hard sciences, and that puts an awful lot of us out of a job, which of course some people might think is a good thing, but it also means that you're narrowing the field of human knowledge in such a way as to remove the truth claim that you got married 10 years ago. And to remove the truth claim that your daughter loves you, and to remove the truth claim, of course, that Jesus is alive. None of those things can be true by definition because we've restricted the boundaries of truth to what science can prove. And as I say, science can't even prove the statement. Science must be able to prove it. And that leaves us with a problem. So at that level, I appeal, in a sense, to the claim, yes, Christianity isn't provable by science. That's not how it works. But so is an awful lot of human knowledge. And if we want to get rid of all of that, then we're going to have big problems about not just religion, but all manner of other things as well. Now, perhaps the most pithy objection for me, the most sort of brief and punchy one, was this quote from Carl Sagan. It's not like Carl Sagan signed onto our website, but somebody quoted him in making this objection. It is far better to grasp the universe as it really is than to persist in delusion, however satisfying and reassuring. And as that quote stands, I think it is entirely true. I think that's absolutely true. I don't want to live in delusion, however satisfying it might be. I want to grasp the universe as it really is. The question, of course, is how do you know what's the delusion and what's the reality? And my argument, I suppose, as we go through this morning, would be that the virgin birth of the cosmos, the atheist Carl Sagan's really belief that you have nothing, then suddenly out of nowhere, an entire universe appears, that's actually the delusion, and that the belief in God is the reality. But we'll build that a little bit as we go over the next 25 minutes and hopefully help you see why we've got there. But all of those objections, I think, can be broadly summed up with this question: how could any thinking person choose God over science? And behind most of those objections, actually, is the idea that there is a necessary struggle between scientific belief and Christian belief, and you can't hold the two together. And it particularly comes down to the flashpoint of Darwin's theory of evolution. So many of you will have seen this on the back of people's cars, the Darwin Fish. The Darwin Fish is a way of taking the ancient Christian symbol of the fish and saying, let's give the fish feet. Do you see what we did there? Made it an evolutionary symbol, and then put the word Darwin in the middle, and you've probably seen it on the back of people's cars. If you haven't, you've probably been driving with your eyes closed, which is unnerving for any number of other reasons. So just be a little bit more careful, perhaps. But the Darwin Fish we find on the back of a lot of cars and in other places in our culture. And what the Darwin Fish is obviously claiming is that the theory of evolution has made Christianity untenable, impossible to hold as a thinking person. So my aim this morning is just to do two things. The first thing I want to do is to show that there is no necessary conflict between Christian belief and evolution by natural selection. The second thing I want to do is to show that our current scientific understanding fits better, in my view, with belief in God than with atheism. And that might sound absurd and impossible to try and show. And one of the reasons we're running these events at Printers Bar, which we'll talk about this morning, and having lots of time for questions and answers, is to be able to let people push back and argue and debate and reason and so on. That's very important to Christians. But those are the two things I'm going to try and do in the next 25 minutes. Show that there's no necessary conflict between evolution and Christian belief. And then to show that our current scientific understanding, for several reasons, I think fits better with belief in God than with atheism. So, first thing we're going to do, there is no necessary conflict between Christian belief and evolution by natural selection. So there are millions of Christians in the world who don't believe in evolution. And there are millions of people who believe in evolution who don't believe in Christianity. But there are also millions of Christians who do believe in evolution. And in this church, you'd find some people who do believe in evolution, and some people who don't, and some people who aren't sure. And that's actually what you'd find if you polled the nation at large as well, I suspect. The Pope, who I guess many of us would concede is probably a Christian, the Pope believes in evolution. Official Catholic dogma has accepted evolution since 1950. It said this: we think evolution is completely compatible with Christian belief in 1950. So we've got lots of, and there's a lot of other Christians I could quote, leading Christians who would come out and say, we believe in evolution. A lot of books in the bookshop we stock would be by people who believe in evolution. So a lot of Christians believe in evolution. But not only that, a lot of leading evolutionists and scientists believe in Christianity. So I'm talking leading scientists. I don't just mean my friend who's a science teacher, as much as I think science teachers are great, and we've got lots of them in this church, and I'm not trying to offend any of them, but I mean people who are even more eminent than science teachers. People who are fellows of the Royal Society, Oxbridge professors of scientific subjects, even the guy who headed up the Human Genome Project. So this guy, Francis Collins, has an excellent book called The Language of God. He's an evangelical Christian, but he headed up the project to map the human genome, which they completed a few years ago, and then he said, now I've done all that, I'm now going to go and work for Barack Obama as his chief science health advisor. So in other words, he knows a lot more about science than anybody here. And there's a lot of people like that who'd say, I'm an evolutionist and I believe in Christianity. This book is his story of how he came to believe Christianity off the back of what he knew as a scientist. So my question, I suppose, would be, given him and many other leading scientists and leading Christians and the Pope, all of whom saying, I think it's completely compatible to believe in evolution and Christianity, if your objection is, no, you can't, I just want to ask, why do you think that's incoherent? Why do you think it's impossible to believe both? You see, for a Christian who, and a lot of Christians might not, that's fine. But if you're coming as a guest, that's what your objection. I'd be saying, why do you think it's incoherent? For a Christian who believes in evolution, choosing between God and science is like choosing between kissing and microbe exchange. So is anybody in the room, actually let's not do a poll, but if you've kissed somebody on the lips in the last 24 hours, you have, according to the dictionary, done this. You have witnessed the approach of two pairs of lips with the reciprocal transmission of microbes and carbon dioxide. That's what you've done, according to the dictionary, right? Some of you done that? I imagine, I'd hope, some of you have, right? Now, you and I would probably read that definition and say, well, that is true, that is what happened, but that isn't quite what I said. I didn't say, honey, I'd really love to exchange my lips with yours and trade microbes and carbon dioxide. I doubt anyone in this room used that phrase. And the reason is because you would say, well, kissing is not reducible to the scientific explanation, but that is what happens scientifically, but that's not all that's going on. There's a level of personal intention and intimacy which is not represented by that phrase. So the scientific explanation is true, but it's not enough. It doesn't quite tell us what really a kiss is. And you'd find the same with love and hormones, right? So you don't find books in Waterstone saying, the love delusion, why hormones debunk the existence of love. Because you say, no, hormones is a chemical way of explaining something, and love is a personal way of explaining it, but that doesn't mean that the two are in opposition. It just means they're different levels of explanation, really. And so around Valentine's Day, people don't drive cars with bumper stickers on the back with like broken hearts and the word hormones across the middle of it saying, you silly people who believe in love. And you say, well, no, because you can believe in hormones and believe in love. It's just the different levels of explanation. And so for a lot of Christians, evolution is like that. It's like a scientific explanation of what God did in his act of creation. It's like saying God created Beachy Head, but he did it by means of cliff erosion. Or God created the Cookmere Haven, but he did it by means of river erosion. And obviously there's lots of Christians who disagree. That's fine. But the point is the two aren't irreconcilable because you're dealing with different levels of explanation. So if I'd come in today with a black eye, the chances are some of you would be saying to me or to others, how'd you get a black eye? And if I at that point said, well, what happened was my eye collided with an object that was denser than it was, and consequently some of the capillaries burst. And so what you're witnessing, the black eye, is the reparation of the cells and lots of blood bringing oxygen to the area in order to try and heal it. You would say to me, yeah, but how did you get your black eye? Because you say that scientific explanation isn't adequate. That's like a physical explanation. I want the personal one. And then I say, well, to be honest, what happened was there's this very large guy who I'd never met before, and I made fun of his face, and he thumped me in the face, and that's how I got black eye. Then you say, oh, that's what I meant, right? That's the explanation I wanted. And the two don't contradict each other, but they are at different levels. And God and science function that way, in my view. God and science are complementary explanations, not rival explanations for the world. And you may not accept that, you may not believe they are, but I would just say, why do you think that's incoherent? Why do you think you can't hold both of those things together? So the first thing I'm just trying to persuade you really is there is no necessary conflict between God and science, or between evolution and Christian belief. The second claim, which is the bigger and hairier and more difficult one I want to try and make this morning, is that our current scientific understanding fits better with belief in God than with atheism. Which sounds ridiculous, of course. Now, how could you possibly say that? So, here's what I mean by that. We've got at least two rival stories about how the world came to be as it is. There's a lot more than two. There's the Buddhist one, the Hindu one, the Islamic one. There's lots of others. But I'm just going to, for the sake of today, just say, let's paint two. Right? The Christian one and the atheist one. There are others, I know, but let's leave those out of it for a second. And the Christian one, the first explanation of how the world came to be as it is something like this. There is an eternal, infinite, good, loving creator who is the ground of being of everything else that exists. He's eternal in that sense, by definition, uncreated, so there's no who made God question to answer, because God has always been. That's what we mean by the word. And that God is eternal and infinite and is the creator. The atheist explanation, if you like, is no, that kind of being does not exist and never has. And everything we see is the result of impersonal, undirected forces of chance and time. That is everything there is. That's the only thing we have. We have matter, and the human eye, right, everything is simply the result of undirected forces of chance and time. And those are the two stories I'm going to suggest are the main players in this discussion, probably given that the objections we're looking at. And my claim is that our current understanding of science fits better with the first story, the Christian one, than with the second story, the atheist one. And I want to say that for 4 reasons, okay? So just look at 4 things that I think we know about the world scientifically that point us in favor of, they don't prove it, but they point us in favor of the Christian story. The first one is the existence of something from nothing. Right, this is the idea of what I might call the virgin birth of the cosmos. Right, which is that the universe creates itself out of nothing, and everything we currently see has appeared out of nowhere for no particular reason, suddenly 13.7 billion years ago. And I think that claim is so hard to defend that it nudges us in favor of the Christian story. So here's how if you like, the atheist picture looks like this. 30 billion years ago, there's nothing. 25 billion years ago, nothing. 20 billion years ago, nothing. 15 billion years ago, nothing. 13.7 billion years ago, suddenly, and for no particular reason, with no creator or design or outside agency at all, an entire universe explodes into being from a single point. That's the claim, right? That's what the Big Bang Theory in an atheist worldview is. Right? It is not caused or prompted by anything outside of itself. From nothing suddenly comes everything. Which is why I call it the virgin birth of the cosmos. I think actually for people, a lot of people who aren't Christians would say, the virgin birth, how ridiculous. And say, well, that's actually what you believe about the universe. And I think that's a real stretch. In the Christian view, if the eternal, infinite creator view is right, the existence of something from nothing is not at all improbable. Because we have an infinite God, creator, who is the ground of being of everything else. And he can decide to create whenever he wants. He's all-powerful. He can do whatever he likes. That's creating the universe out of nothing is no big deal. But in the atheist view, the sudden appearance of something from nothing is a problem. It's something that people have to explain more and more elaborate models to try and understand. And they might be right, but they require so many ifs and buts and leaps into the unknown that I think that, simply taken at face value, the idea that there is a world which suddenly appeared billions of years ago is itself something that would nudge me in favor of the Christian explanation as opposed to the atheist one. So the existence of something from nothing is the first scientific reality we know about that would point me in favor of the Christian view of the world. The second one is the emergence of order from chaos. Right? This is the cosmic Welcomemat theory, really, which is just when you look at the universe, it looks like we knew we were coming. And what you have is from this singular point, an explosion of enormous dissolution of energy, you would expect it to scatter and dissipate all over whatever there is out there and gradually fragment and unravel and form less and less ordered things. Instead, what you have is it forms more and more ordered things, and it forms planets and galaxies and then eventually single-celled organisms and then eventually people like you, and that process bucks the trend of everything else we know, and although you can't prove that it didn't happen, again, lends quite a lot more weight to the Christian story than to the atheist one. So this is a quote from this guy I mentioned before, the guy who ran the Human Genome Project, Francis Collins. This is his summary of the scientific side of it. He said, when you look from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if it knew we were coming. There are 15 constants or physical numbers that have precise values. If any one of those constants was off by even 1 part in a million, or in some cases by 1 part in a million, the universe couldn't have actually come to the point where we see it. Matter would not have been able to coalesce or come together. There would have been no galaxy, stars, planets, or people. Right, that's the scientific statement that is being made. We have 15 independent numbers that all have to be exactly what they are to a very highly specified degree for the universe like ours to be possible. And consequently, it looks like it's not simply a question of blind chance that they are what they are. And the best way I know of illustrating this is you're going to use the atheist story for a minute and say you've now got no God, no designer, just chance and time. It's like playing a game of galactic roulette with 15 wheels, and every one of the wheels has got 1 million numbers on it. Okay? And so you come to the first wheel, it's got 1 million numbers, not the 36 or whatever there are. Some of you are really into the Vegas thing, I'm not sure how many there are. But you go and you swing the wheel with 1 million numbers on it, shoom, and you send the white ball around and lands on the right one. And you say, that's amazing, 1 in a million shot. And then the head in charge of the casino says, yep, you're not there yet. You've got to do that 14 more times. So you do the second one, shum, and you land in the right place. Third one, shum, fourth one, shum. And you keep getting it. And you ring your mum, and you say, wow, mum, you're not going to believe it. I'm on the best run of luck anyone's ever had by billions of times. And she says, oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart. And the news cameras arrive, and they start filming you. And you move all the way along. And then, my mum doesn't sound like that. I don't know why I said it like that. And number 15, the 15th wheel doesn't have 1 million numbers on it. It doesn't even have 1 million numbers on it. It has 10 to the power 60 numbers on it, which is 1 with 60 noughts after it. In other words, the wheel is larger than you can possibly imagine. It's the size of the world. I don't actually know how large a wheel like that would be. But the 15th wheel, you've got 1 in a million, 14 times. The 15th one has got 10 to the power 60 numbers on it. And you swing that and it goes, shum, cha, 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 cha. And you go, yes! And then it goes, cha. And you go, no, it's out by 1. And because it's out by 1, we have to go back to the beginning and there's no universe. And we have to have that kind of run of luck again, only with the right digit landing on the final wheel. That's the sort of scale of odds we're talking about, in Francis Collins' words, of the universe emerging by chance. The odds are astronomically low, given the atheist story that you'd have a universe like this. Given the Christian story, the odds aren't low at all. God speaks, God says, I want a universe like this, off we go. Given the atheist story, it's immensely unlikely. And here's a quote from another guy called Sir John Polkinghorne, which I think is the sort of name that when you're given it as a child means you will be an eminent scientist no matter what you do. And he was the master of Queen's College, Cambridge, fellow of the Royal Society, written a lot of books about science, very, very bright man. And he said this, which is just about this last wheel that I've just mentioned, the 15th one. For us to be possible requires a balance between the effects of expansion and contraction, which at a very early epoch in the universe's history, the Planck time, has to differ from equality by not more than 1 in 10 to the power 60. Hold the slide there. How many people in the room are currently marveling? You would say, my emotion is one of marvel. I'm stroking my beard, if I have one. I'm ruminating, and I'm turning to my other half, if I'm here with somebody or my friend, and saying, I'm marveling at this number. How many people can honestly say that's your reaction? So Jane... Yes, you are good. Okay, a couple of people, good. It's good. A few medical people, excellent. Some very sage-looking individuals out there. Most of the rest of you aren't marveling. I think that's tragic. John Polkinghorne thinks that means you aren't very numerate. Look at what he's about to say. This is incredibly patronizing, but I think quite funny. He then says, the numerate will marvel at such a degree of accuracy. So, round of applause for our numerate friends, the few people who are marveling. Now, for the non-numerate, in other words, the great unwashed out there, which is you guys, you can't count, he seems to think, I will borrow an illustration from Paul Davis. I'm going to draw you a picture. That's what he says. I think it's funny. From Paul Davis of what the accuracy means. He points out that it is the same as aiming at a target an inch wide on the other side of the observable universe, 20,000 million light years away, and hitting the mark. Now, are all the non-numerate people in the room now marveling? Yes, you're marveling, aren't you? Good, right. I'm the same. I don't marvel at the number until I see the illustration. But that is staggering. And he's saying that's just the 15th number, 20,000 million light years away, other side of the universe, an inch-wide target, and I've hit it by chance. That's the scale of odds we're talking about for just the last number, not all the others. And it's for numbers like that that mean I would, looking at the two stories, the Christian one and the atheist one, I would say that requires such a leap into the unknown and so many ifs and buts and so much faith in a way that I don't know that I could jump there. Whereas the Christian story has a creator, it makes absolutely perfect sense within that particular setup. And my favorite quote or my favorite illustration of this whole idea comes from two famous atheists. Richard Dawkins quoting Douglas Adams. Richard Dawkins, on the inside of his cover of his book, The God Delusion, quotes Douglas Adams, another famous atheist, and wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide and so on. He quotes him saying this, "Isn't it enough to believe that a garden's beautiful without having to believe there are fairies at the bottom of it too?" And I say, yes, it is enough to see that a garden's beautiful without thinking there are fairies at the bottom of it too. When I look at a garden, it doesn't make me believe in fairies. It does make me believe in gardeners. Third reason, some of you are getting there. It's all right, that's fine. Third reason, life from non-living matter. Right? This is so that we've got order from chaos. We started with something from nothing, order from chaos. Thirdly, life from non-living matter. And this illustration often used is the one of the monkeys at the typewriter. Okay, so we have a monkey sitting at a typewriter. And the claim here is, basically, if you leave chance and time long enough, you will get life. Don't worry about it. Yes, it's strange. Yes, it's wonderful. But leave enough matter, 600 million years on Earth, and you will have life. So the monkey's sitting at the typewriter, and the chances are eventually he produces the complete works of Shakespeare, so what's the problem? So there's no problem. There isn't an issue, right? You just leave him long enough, you'll be fine. And at 1 keystroke a second, the monkey might well eventually get to the complete works of Shakespeare, but he doesn't manage to do it in 600 million years. So what I decided to do to run the numbers is instead of saying type the complete works of Shakespeare, I just ran the numbers for how long would it take a monkey typing at 1 keystroke a second to type to be or not to be, that is the question, right? On average, how long is it going to take my monkey friend at 1 keystroke a second? I don't know how long you think that would be. Maybe you could have a guess. Would it be less or more than 600 million years, which is the period life on Earth is supposed to have emerged within? And when I ran the numbers, to be or not to be, that is the question, takes 12.6 trillion years to type just that phrase. And a DNA string which you have to have for like the life we have now, doesn't emerge is not like a sentence's worth of information. A DNA string has got as much information as the Encyclopedia Britannica. Right? So if we're saying that emerged, something of that complexity emerged by chance, undirected, within 600 million years, again, it's mathematically possible, but it's so incredibly unlikely that it would have that it tilts me in favor of the Christian story in which God creating life is simply a question of saying, let there be, and there was. In the atheist story, that's much harder to explain. And for the fourth thing that tips me that way is the emergence of consciousness out of non-consciousness. So this is really the question, why do you think? Why is there such a thing as a mind? Why do we write songs and poems and worship gods and have conversations and understand language? Why do we do that? From an atheist point of view, the problem of consciousness is freely admitted. Right? So Richard Dawkins, again, he admits in the God Delusion, well, yes, I know there's a lot of difficult steps here with the emergence of planets and then life. He said, the development of the eukaryotic cell is an even more momentous and difficult and statistically improbable step than the formation of life. And then, he admits, and the emergence of consciousness is another major gap whose bridging is of the same order of improbability. Which basically way of saying, yes, even if you got the first three things, something from nothing, order from chaos, life from non-living matter, that's all pretty weird, but it's just as bad, if not worse, to think of how consciousness emerged from non-conscious, non-thinking matter. In other words, even leading atheist scientists admit consciousness emerging in the universe's history is staggeringly improbable. Once more, though, if you have an infinite creator God who loves and wants relationship with his creatures, creating a being who is able to think and reason and deduce and use language and write poetry and worship him is in no way improbable. So for me, those four things, the existence of something out of nothing, order from chaos, life from non-living matter, and consciousness from non-consciousness, those four things lean me in favor of the Christian version of the story rather than the atheist one. They do not, however, prove God. That's not what I'm doing. I wouldn't even begin to claim that's what I'm doing. It doesn't work that way. You cannot prove scientifically Jesus rose from the dead. You can't prove the existence of God. That doesn't work that way. I personally don't think that's a problem because I don't think all human knowledge is scientifically provable, and I don't think you do either. But the point is here, there are four things that fit better with a Christian story than with a non-Christian story or an atheist story. And I think that's very significant. There are other reasons, if we had time, we'd go into. Again, if you'd like to discuss them, kick them around at Printers Bar on the 16th of March, it'd be great to talk some of this stuff through with you. So let's return to the opening question. Right, the opening question was, how could any thinking person choose God over science? And the answer I'm giving is, you don't have to. Nobody does. You do not have to. Because in the first place, there's no necessary conflict between scientific understanding of origins via Darwinian evolution and Christian belief. Some people will reject aspects of Darwinian thought, others won't. That's not, in some ways, that's not the point for today. The point is they are compatible and can be held together, and there's no reason why one excludes the other. And in the second place, the reason you don't have to choose between God and science is because there are a number of features of our scientific understanding at the moment that fit better with belief in God than with atheism. Something from nothing, order from chaos, life from non-living matter, and the emergence of consciousness. And that still leaves a whole lot of questions wide open. That leaves a lot of things that you might want to talk about, a lot of yeah, buts, and yeah, but you skipped over that point, and yes, but have you read so-and-so? And that's exactly what those evenings at Printers Bar are for. We want to have a chance to have back and forth, discuss, debate, reason. I guess, as I said, very important to Christians that we do that. But what we're going to do for now is we're going to close this bit of the meeting for a moment. Graham is going to come up and give a little explanation of what we're going to do next. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.